But not every artist had that kind of straightforward optimism about the machine. There were some that viewed it with more irony and detachment, more like voyeurs than participants, because they perceived that the thing was more than a tool, more than simply an extension of the manufacturing self. Having been made by man, it had become a perverse but substantially accurate self-portrait. Such was the implication of Francis Picabia's work and of Marcel Duchamp's. The machine, as Picabia put it in one of his titles, is the daughter born without a mother, a modern counterpart to the virgin birth in which Christ, the Son, was born without a father. Machinery parodied both sex and religion. It contained limitless possibilities for giving offence, which Picabia was born to do. Picabia was one of those men, almost a modernist invention in themselves, who was locked in a struggle with the very idea of art. He wanted to laugh the notion of painting to death. He had a very strong sense of myth, and he couldn't find another outlet for it. The myth was that of the machine as man's counterpart. It obsessed Picabia. It was his main amusement. He married rich and he bought one fast car after another, as though he were trying to turn himself into a mechanical centaur. It was also the theme of his art, the body as machine. In 1914, he painted an enormous image of a sexual encounter with a dancer called "I See Again in Memory My Dear Udny." The 19th century novelist Joris Huysman foresaw it in a way when he wrote,
"Look at the machine, the play of pistons and the cylinders. They are steel Romeos inside cast-iron Juliets. The ways of human expression are in no way different to the back and forth of our machines. This is a law to which one must pay homage, unless one is either impotent or a saint."
Picabia was neither. He had a flair for the old in-out, mechanical sex, mechanical self. No wonder Picabia's machine portraits still look so very sardonic. The machine is amoral. Its movements are programmed. It can only act, and nobody wants to be compared to a mechanical slave. Marcel Duchamp would push the machine metaphor even further. Before giving up art for chess, Duchamp had played with every existing art movement and predicted a number of those to come.
Well, when you are 15 and paint like the Impressionists, you're experimenting with yourself, so to speak. You don't know what you're going to do. You don't know even that you are going to do anything else. It took me 10 years or a little more to change the style, or at least to say, well, there's nothing more in the Impressionism to find, and I tried to find something else. I first went through Fauvism, I went through Cubism, and then only in 1912 or 13 that I found more or less what I wanted to do, which would not be influenced by movements that I'd been through, you see.
The nude descending a staircase is one of the half-dozen most famous paintings of our century. It's a transcription of movement based, again, on Maret's photographs. As Cubism, it's quite academic. When the American press saw it, it was seized on as a supreme joke. But the Cubists themselves, back in Paris, were not amused.
When I came with my new descending staircase, they didn't see that it applied to their theory. It was not an illustration of their theory. And in fact, it had more than Cubism had, that is the idea of movement, which the Futurists had at the same time. So they thought it was too much neither one, nor Futurist nor Cubism, and they condemned it.
But it did open up the way to Duchamp's most influential work, the large glass, which he left unfinished after 8 years. Like the nude, the glass treated the body as a mechanical object. Why on glass? Duchamp explained.
Because mainly the transparency of the glass. I wanted to... I had always noticed that the trouble with an oil painting and easel painting is you never know how to do the background. You make a portrait or you make some scene or some still life, And then comes the background. What are you going to do in the background? You put something in the background and it always false, or at least very seldom justified. It's just a filling up canvas. With the glass, you don't have to do that. The glass is transparent, and you put anything behind you wish, and you change it every day if you wish as well. And that was for me an element of novelty to convince me I could go on with it. There's also some kind of literary part to it. It was intended to have every item on the glass, every little design on the glass, explained with with words. It was nothing spontaneous about it, which of course is a great objection on the part of aestheticians. They want the subconscious to speak by itself. I don't care. And it was the opposite in that way. So at the end of 8 years, even not finished, I decided to stop.
So what is this thing? Well, it's a machine, but we'd be better off calling it a project for an unfinished contraption that could never be built because its use was never clear, because in turn it parodies the language and the forms of science without the slightest regard for scientific probability or cause or effect. Supposing that an engineer were to use this thing as a blueprint, he'd be in deep trouble, because the large glass is never explicit, and looked at from the point of view of technical systems, it's simply absurd. The notes that Duchamp left to go with it are the most scrambled instruction manual that you can imagine, but they're deliberately scrambled. For instance, he talked about the thing running on a mythical fuel of his own invention called love gasoline, which passed through filters into feeble cylinders which activated a desire motor, none of which would really have meant very much to Henry Ford. But this is a meta-machine that takes us away from the real world of machinery into that of allegory, with the naked bride up there perpetually disrobing herself in the top half, and down below the poor little bachelors in their empty jackets endlessly grinding away, signalling their frustration to the girl above them. In fact, this thing is an allegory of profane love, which Marcel Duchamp would have us believe is the only sort that is left in the 20th century. Its real text was written by Sigmund Freud in The Interpretation of Dreams, published in 1900. The imposing mechanism of the male sexual apparatus, said Freud, lends itself to symbolization by every sort of indescribably complicated machinery. But the male mechanism of the large glass is not imposing at all. The bachelors are just uniforms, like marionettes. According to Duchamp's notes, they try to indicate their desire to the bride by making the chocolate grinder turn, and it grinds out an imaginary milky stuff like semen, which squirts up through those rings, but can't get into the bride's half of the glass because of that bar. And so the bride is condemned always to tease, and the bachelor's fate is endless masturbation. In one sense, the bride stripped bare is a glimpse into hell, a peculiarly modernist hell of repetition and loneliness. But you could also see it as a declaration of freedom, if you recall the crushing taboos against masturbation that were in force when Duchamp was young. It was the symbol of rebellion against one's parents, and to that extent, the large glass is a free machine, or at least a defiant machine. But it was also a sad machine, a testament to indifference, that emotion of which Duchamp was the master. When the large glass was broken in its crate while being shipped, how did he feel?
Nothing, not much. I was, well, no, I was not, because I'm fatalist, maybe, enough to take anything as it comes along. And fortunately, a little later, when I look at the brakes, I loved the brakes. It happened to be that two panes, glass panes on top of one another, with paints on it, holding a bit. When they break on the vibration of being transported flat, you see, on a truck, the brakes take a similar direction in the two panes. So when you put them on top of one another, They seemed to continue the same breaks as though I had done it in purpose.
Duchamp's finely tuned indifference is one of the divides between the late machine age and the time in which we live. The large glass was a long way from the optimism and the sense of possibility with which greater painters but less sophisticated men than Duchamp greeted the machine in those long lost days before World War I. For machinery was now turned on its inventors and their children. After 40 years of continuous peace in Europe, the worst war in history cancelled the faith in good technology. The myth of the future went into shock, and European art moved into its years of irony, disgust and protest.